Now, the ANC NEC is meeting today to finalise the party's January 8 statement. The annual governing party's address will be delivered by President Cyril Ramaphosa on Friday evening. The year's commemoration will be the first time since the dawn of democracy when the ANC women have a live event due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Today's meeting will go through Ramaphosa's speech, which is expected to be dominated by the country's coronavirus response and economic recovery plans. All right, senior politics reporter Ziyanda Ngcobo joins me now in studio. Ziyanda, thank you so much and welcome back from your long holiday. Well, it's back to work, and yes, I'm sure back to work for the ANC as well. Yeah. So today's meeting, very important. I mean, a lot on the plate to discuss. Yeah. Talk to us about some of the points that will be coming out in this meeting. Obviously, January 8 being at the top of that agenda.
Certainly. So I think there's a lot of expectation then that it won't just be January 8 and that issue that was dominating headlines towards the end of 2020 around step-aside principle will be discussed. But it doesn't seem as though that this particular meeting will be dealing with that matter. Usually this is a run-of-the-mill ANC NEC meeting, the first one of the year, to set the agenda, to look back at what has happened in the previous year, but to mainly also focus then on that January 8 statement. Now, it's also going to be very different this year because for the first time since the dawn of democracy, then they won't be having a live event, and we've seen over the years how live events and stadium politics has become a thing over how much you can actually fill up a stadium as a barometer of how much support the ANC still garners. But of course then, many would say that the ANC is going back to what it used to do before democracy, where January 8 statements would be broadcast on Radio Freedom. It would be laced in political ideology predominantly. But of course, the ANC is now a governing party. We're in the midst of a pandemic. We're in the second wave and the second variant at that. And that's obviously why then this event will be taken virtually on Friday evening, and the president will deliver that. So that's what that NEC meeting is about. But of course, to also discuss the economic recovery plan. And you know, whilst the ANC NEC is meeting, the National Coronavirus Command Council met this morning. So there's a lot of overlap. So we're expecting, you know, as well for Ramaphosa to almost straddle between his hat as state president and that of the ANC.
Now, before we get into that National Command Council, the president, obviously, before the holiday period, announced how the January 8 statement was going to unfold in terms of what was going to happen. But earlier, before that, we saw a lot of misalignment between members of the ANC. Yeah. You know, it was prematurely, I would say, announced that the event was going to be held in the Free State. Then we were told it was going to be held in Limpopo. Yeah. When the numbers grew in terms of, you know, COVID-19, we were then told it was going to be held virtual. What happens in provinces during this time?
So in provinces, they'll have to, you know, watch it virtually just like the rest of us. But I think you're raising an important point about how polarized the ANC has been and what this January 8 statement will mean to be hosted virtually, where you can't actually have the crowds meeting. We're going into the local government elections, so the officials have been robbed of an opportunity to interact with the voters, to hear from them what's happening. I think the only time the ANC got to do that last year was during those by-elections, which then the ANC claimed as a victory because of them winning particular wards. Now, this issue, of course, of the announcement, the premature announcement by the Secretary General outside the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court after appearing on corruption charges last year and saying it will be held in Mangaung, and then the ANC saying it will be held in Limpopo. That's already just an indication of, you know, the separation of the chief administrative officer, that being the SG, and that of the president, and whatever else then the top six and the NEC actually have been discussing. And this is why then this January 8 statement will be important, because we keep hearing about unity and organizational renewal. But what does that mean in practical terms? And then this is when the step aside principle becomes crucial. And so when the ANC discusses it, it's something that sparked public interest, because then it actually will filter down to all, the ANC branches. Just yesterday, we saw divisions when that ANC councillor who appeared on charges of rape, some were saying that this is now being used as a political tool to have him step aside. So this issue of step aside, it's not just about the Secretary General, but it's actually about the marching orders that the NEC needs to give so that all the structures of the movement know exactly how they approach certain matters, especially then when the officials who've been deployed in positions of power, especially when it has to deal with governance, because this becomes the issue then when Ramaphosa is addressing as ANC president. There's usually lots of ideology, radical economic transformation, but what does that mean when you have deployees in the state who are looting, who don't want to appear before the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, who continuously cry political conspiracy when they actually have to face law enforcement?
What does it mean when your house is burning in actual fact? So you mentioned obviously the SG and you've also mentioned that ANC councillor, and you raised an important word there about polarization. I mean, yesterday we saw that letter by Dakota Lehuete, who is, talking about Ace Magashule's charge sheet, which taints the integrity of state institutions. Now, everybody is saying that the SG will be a point of discussion today. What's your take on that?
Certainly it will be a point of discussion. I don't think that the ANC can avoid it when looking at what is expected to come out of the January 8th statement. But I think what, the senior officials of the ANC have been trying to avoid, even if you look at how they responded to those charges against Magashule, is to make it about one person and make it about the politics of personalities, which the ANC and most political parties in South Africa, actually, to be fair, have struggled with, and to go back then to speak about ideology, because the transition from being a liberation movement to being a governing party is something that the ANC has often been criticized about. That they sometimes forget that now you can't be talking about dealing with corruption when you're actually in government, so you can actually deal with corruption. You have the levers of power to deal with the issues that you continually raise in your January 8th statement. So fundamentally the economic recovery plan, we're expecting the president to also touch on that. I mean, we've just heard now that the South African breweries is taking government to court over the alcohol ban. That also needs to be discussed because they are the governing party at the end of the day. So I think this January 8th statement is going to be very important outside of how it's being held, but in terms of its content and how much it will actually be an honest reflection of where the ANC is and how the ANC has performed in government.
And another, you just mentioned it now, how the ANC has performed in government. You said that President Cyril Ramaphosa is going to have to balance, having to handle the party discussion, but also what's happening in government. National Command Center, Command Coronavirus Council meeting today. Yes. Obviously, as the country really batters under the second variant, how is Ramaphosa expected to take the country forward in terms of just some of the concerns that are coming out from not only the public but also the medical fraternity as it relates to this vaccine rollout? I mean, a lot of criticism leveled at the Minister of Health because he doesn't have a strategy as it speaks to the vaccine rollout. A lot of people saying it's a plan that's not even on paper.
Certainly, and I think, the issue of the vaccine is likely to come out in that January 8th statement, but I think it's also going to dominate the news headlines for at least the first half of this year as we, and I say we as in citizens, the public, the medical fraternity in particular, try and get an understanding of what this plan is. Why are the deadlines continuously being pushed back? What happened to the 500 billion rand that was raised? where has that money gone? How has it been spent? And that's the level of transparency that we haven't necessarily gotten from government until the public was kicking up dust. And so, it doesn't help then that sometimes we don't get much from the finance minister, just to get an update on where exactly Treasury is, because then we always get the health ministry saying, oh, Treasury needs to do this. So there needs to be communication in one voice. If you remember at the beginning of the pandemic in March last year, there was a sense of comfort, I think, that citizens felt because there was communication, strong communication, speaking in one voice, and communication coming from one place. As soon as then you had ministers coming out, they were contradicting messages that were coming out, which caused confusion and also gives space then for misinformation and fake news, as we've seen with issues of 5G and how then the rollout of this vaccine will play out and what's at play. So I think then the January 8th statement now should be used as an opportunity to reflect on all those things, because he is also state president. Yes, he will be wearing his hat as ANC president, but I think at this particular point in time, it's not necessarily easy to separate the two, given the circumstances then that this particular January 8th will be delivered under.
And unfortunately, he has to touch on it as we go into the elections, even though they are later on in the year. But this will be ultimately the ANC's legacy in terms of how the government led by the ANC has dealt with this pandemic. And again, we talk about finances. I think one of the critical things that is coming out of that conversation is, why was money not prioritized to vaccinations? I mean, we know that the Minister of Health has said that we're likely to see vaccinations happening in the second quarter. This is after he said in the first quarter. And now in his, his latest statement or conference that he's held, he said something along the lines of, we're going to push to see if we can have the first vaccines by February. A lot of contradictions in terms of, when will we get the vaccinations? Does South Africa have the money? Why was the money not funneled through immediately, especially if we can still talk about state-owned entities like the SAA being bailed out?
Exactly, and I think you've touched on two important points: the communication aspects that I've already touched on, but also then it's the budgeting, and for me it's linked to the first point, a lack of transparency. I personally would love to hear from the finance minister or someone from the Treasury to unpack to us, this is the money that we got over X period of time, and this is how we have gone about this. Now, you raise the issue of SAA. I know there's been lots of talk about, there's 10 billion rand that's going to go to SAA to bail them out, yet we're struggling even to understand, what's happening with monies for a vaccine at this particular point in time. So for me, it goes back to that communication thing and setting the agenda. That's exactly what we should be getting at, not these contradictory messages that leave too many vacuums, and you literally have almost everyone mushrooming and saying whatever it is that they're speaking about, and there's no sense of a hold over this particular situation. We had just yesterday over 500 deaths. Our numbers are continuing to rise. We have this lack of communication, and then on the other end, we're not sure when we're getting a vaccine. Many people are coming back into Gauteng. There are so many factors. Oh, the health system. I mean, how could I forget? The health system is under severe pressure across most of the provinces at this particular point in time. Where are we when it comes to that? So this is why then the statement will be very important, to get a clear understanding of how deployees of the ANC are expected to behave in their positions of power in government.
Very quickly, before I let you go, Ziyanda, a lot of the electorate of the ANC will want to hear something come from the president about the party itself as we head to those elections in November. What are the key focus areas he should be touching on, apart obviously from the ones that we've discussed, which is also the pandemic, and also the ANC members themselves? What is a strong message that they want to be hearing from Ramaphosa on the 8th?
I think one of the things will be this, the discussion on political morality of ANC members, which talks to the conduct of ANC members, not just if they're deployed in government, but wherever they may be. I think the issue of organizational renewal will become important in many aspects to deal with issues such as step aside and issues such as the economic recovery plan. I say that because there's also a sense of fatigue and irritation from the public about you don't have this money. Has it gone towards those who've stolen money from the state? We saw that PPE scandal coming out, and so that's expected to be spoken about. I think the president will also touch on other aspects of the economic recovery plan in relation to the high levels of unemployment and inequality. And I think there's going to be an expectation this time around. I think it has been there for a while, but this time around, timelines, solid plans and timelines, which we don't usually get. I think there's a sense of fatigue over speaking in generic terms about issues faced by South African society. So I think those are some of the things then that will be expected of the president this Friday evening.
A clear plan, timelines and accountability.
100%.
Thank you so much, Ziyanda, for your time this afternoon. Really appreciate it.